So I just want to do a little myth busting about building muscle mass. And you may have seen that you need to train in a certain rep range to build more muscle mass. And there's a kernel of truth to this, but the single most important factor to building muscle mass is being in proximity to failure. So higher rep ranges will tend to be more hypertrophic than lower rep ranges. If you're doing sets of like 10 to 12, you'll tend to build more muscle mass than if you're doing sets of like 2 to 4 or 3 to 5. The reason for this, though, is because if you're doing sets of 10 to 12, you are much more likely to be close to or at failure when you're finishing that set, versus if you're doing a set of 3, you're typically not going to take it to failure because it's just so heavy. So again, higher rep ranges will tend to be more hypertrophic. They'll tend to produce more muscle mass just by the fact that they are you're spending much more time in proximity to failure. That being said, there is actually a few studies done, and there was a group that did higher reps, like the 8 to 12, and there was a group that did low reps, like 1 to 5. And the group that did 1 to 5 reps actually built more strength and more muscle mass than the other group, the higher rep range group. However, the caveat here is the low rep range group, their workouts were 3 to 4 hours long compared to the relatively normal group. So you can absolutely build hypertrophy. You can build a lot of muscle mass doing really heavy weights, really low reps, and just doing a lot of volume there. But again, 3 to 4 hour workouts really it doesn't make sense for a lot of people. So currently, the best kind of rep ranges for hypertrophy really is anything, but practically speaking, 6 to 12, 6 to 8 tends to be typically the best range because you can get to failure, get pretty close to failure there. There's also some research coming out now that says 6 to 8 is probably a little bit better than going higher than that, than doing 10 to 12, just because there is actually less central fatigue on your body and your nervous system. So you're spending less time near failure or at failure, but you're still producing the same stimulus. So 6 to 8 right now is 6 to 8 going at or near failure is right now the best range for building muscle mass. I'm sure more data will say something else at some other point. But if you are just doing higher, if you're going through those rep ranges like I talked about before, you're going to hit a decent amount. Like if you start at higher rep ranges, you're going to get a decent amount of hypertrophy. If you go to mid-tier rep ranges, you're still going to produce a decent amount of hypertrophy. And then once you get down to lower rep ranges, you can focus a little bit more on maximal strength.